you're gonna see your favorite television star. Look, Superman!
Happy birthday, little Ricky. Which one of you is Ricky?
That's it, right there.
How are you, sweetie? Happy birthday. Any of you fellas want to wrestle? Yeah!
The man who once looked like the perfect hero, strong, fearless, and easy to admire, was George Reeves. He brought Superman to life on screen in a way that made people believe heroes could actually exist. Kids watched him and saw hope, courage, and something bigger than real life. To the public, he was not just an actor. To many people, he truly was Superman. That is what made the moment of his death in 1959 so unsettling. When he passed away, the farewell did not match his fame. There were no massive crowds, cameras were missing. Hollywood, the place where he once mattered most, stayed quiet. Only a small group showed up to say goodbye. The silence was heavy. For someone known across the country, it felt almost unreal. How does a man loved by so many end up leaving the world like that? Was it bad timing, bad circumstances, or something deeper that made people stay away? What really happened to the man behind the cape? It also raises another question. Why did the world turn its back on Superman when he needed support the most? To understand that, it helps to look at where George Reeves came from and what shaped him long before the fame. George Reeves, the original Superman, was born on January 5, 1914 in Woodstock, Iowa. His birth name was George Kiefer Brewer. Not long after he was born, his parents separated and his life became unstable early on. He spent much of his childhood moving from place to place with his mother. They lived in Kentucky, then Illinois, before finally settling in California. His mother, Helen, later married Frank Besso. Frank legally adopted George, and his name changed to George Besso. That relationship did not last either. After the separation, Helen told George that Frank had died. Years later, George learned the truth. Frank Besso was still alive. That discovery left a deep mark on him. The emotional confusion stayed with him for a long time and added to the weight he carried as he grew older. Even with all that chaos, George found an escape. He leaned into the arts and discovered something that gave him purpose. In school, he stood out as a performer, both singing and acting, chasing a spotlight that felt more stable than his early life ever was. After graduating from high school, George Reeves continued his education at Pasadena Junior College before moving on to the Pasadena Playhouse, one of the most respected acting schools at the time. It was there that he sharpened his skills and started building real connections in the industry. During this period, he met Eleanor Needles, and the two eventually married in 1940. Their relationship lasted a little over a decade before ending in divorce in 1950. George's first real taste of recognition came in 1939 with a small role in Gone with the Wind. Even though the part was minor, it was enough to put his face on the radar. That appearance helped him land a contract with Warner Brothers, and around that time, he officially changed his professional name to George Reeves. He stayed busy, but most of the films he appeared in during those years were low-budget projects that did little to boost his reputation. Later, George signed with 20th Century Fox, but that agreement didn't last long either, ending in 1942. Around that same time, he was cast in the war drama So Proudly We Hail, a role that shifted his perspective. Not long after, he made a serious decision and enlisted in the U.S. Army in early 1943, where he was assigned to the Army Air Forces. During the war, George starred in the stage production Winged Victory and appeared in its film version as well. He also took part in training films made for soldiers, doing his part away from the battlefield. When the war ended, he returned to Hollywood hoping to pick up where he left off, but the industry had moved on. Roles were scarce, and he took whatever work he could find, including small film parts. At one point, he even worked digging cesspools just to pay his bills. In 1951, George was offered the role of Superman in a new television series. At first, he wasn't impressed, since television was not taken seriously at the time. Still, the show became a massive hit and turned him into a household name. That success came with a cost. George became so closely tied to Superman that casting directors stopped seeing him as anything else. His contract limited outside work, and as the late 1950s rolled in, his attempts to break free from the character kept falling apart, leaving him stuck in a role he could not escape. Casting directors could no longer see George Reeves as anything other than Superman. He had become locked into the role, and no matter how hard he pushed, Hollywood refused to take him seriously as a dramatic actor. The situation grew more frustrating when he looked at his paycheck. For a role that demanded long hours, physical strain, and constant public attention, the money did not match the effort. George wanted more control over his creative life and a real way out of the Superman image. To do that, he tried to build something of his own. He developed an idea for a television series called Port of Entry, which he personally wrote. The concept was bold and different. He wanted to shoot episodes in locations like Hawaii and Mexico, giving the show a gritty, international edge that felt fresh and adventurous. From George's point of view, the plan made sense. It showed ambition and a clear desire to grow beyond what people expected of him. The problem was money. No studio was willing to finance the project, and without backing, the series never moved beyond early planning. At the same time, the production team behind Adventures of Superman was struggling too. They could not find anyone who could realistically replace George in the role. Eventually, the producers came back to him with a much better deal. Reports claimed the offer was around $5,000 per week, a serious amount for that era, especially since filming only lasted a few weeks each year. With limited options and ongoing financial pressure, George agreed to return. By 1959, despite his inner conflict and lingering doubts, the next season was already taking shape. The costumes were being updated, writers were working on new scripts, the cast was being lined up. George, now in his mid-40s, still felt unsure about wearing the cape again, but production was moving forward. Filming was expected to begin soon, even as he wrestled with the reality of being forever tied to Superman. Then everything stopped. Before the cameras could roll, George Reeves died suddenly. The news sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. The smiling hero millions had grown up watching was gone, and from the very start, the circumstances surrounding his death were unclear. Some believed he took his own life. Others suspected foul play. The questions never faded, and the rumors only grew louder with time.
So the actor who played Superman died in a really horrible way, and there are like conspiracy theories surrounding it.
What was supposed to feel like a comeback instead became a tragedy. Even today, the name George Reeves still brings up questions that never seem to settle. The final stretch of his life was filled with pressure, disappointment, and goals that never fully came together. The cruel part is that everything unraveled just as he was preparing himself for another return to the spotlight. By 1958, George Reeves was dealing with heavy stress from every direction. His career was uncertain, his finances were tight, and his personal life was in constant motion. Around that time, he had ended a long and complicated relationship with Toni Mannix, the wife of powerful MGM executive Eddie Mannix. That chapter closed quietly, but it left emotional weight behind. Not long after, George became engaged to Leonore Lemon, a bold and outspoken socialite known for her high-energy personality and glamorous lifestyle. The two were reportedly planning to get married on June 19, 1959, followed by a honeymoon trip to Tijuana. On the surface, it looked like George was ready to reset his life. A new marriage, possible work ahead, and the promise of a fresh start made things appear hopeful. Behind closed doors, the picture was far less stable. George was struggling financially, something he admitted to close friends and even his mother. Despite his fame, the money people assumed he had simply was not there. His paycheck from the Superman television series was modest by Hollywood standards, and the short filming schedule meant he only worked a few weeks out of the year. Even with those struggles, George tried to stay positive. The possibility of reviving Adventures of Superman gave him something to hold on to. It was a small sense of hope, but it mattered. Alongside that, he was also making efforts to move behind the camera, hoping to transition into directing and finally gain more control over his future. Phyllis Coates, who originally played Lois Lane on the series, stood firmly behind George Reeves during this period. She believed in him and supported his efforts to build something new. George saw this project as his real chance to finally break away from the Superman image that had wrapped itself around his entire career. In his mind, it was supposed to be a clean reset and a fresh start. Unfortunately, the funding never came through, and without money, the idea collapsed before it could even begin. There were still opportunities on the table, but almost all of them led back to the same place: Superman. Once again, a Superman stage show was being planned for July, and there were talks about taking the performance on tour in Australia. While the work promised some financial relief, it also came with a harsh reminder. No matter how much time passed, George could not escape the Cape, even at 45 years old. The situation put him in an uncomfortable position. He was no longer at the peak of fame, yet he was not free either. Audiences still adored him as Superman, but George did not want to be locked into that identity forever. The role paid the bills, but it also kept him trapped in a version of himself he was trying to outgrow. George Reeves was deeply ambitious, but his reality was far more complicated than it appeared on the surface. Over time, that pressure began to weigh on his mood. Being known only as Superman drained him, even though fans spoke lovingly about the character and what it represented. Those who knew George personally described him very differently. People often talked about his kindness, his respectful nature, and how grounded he was compared to others in the industry. He was not known for ego or arrogance, and many co-stars and crew members felt comfortable around him. Off-screen, he carried himself with the same decency people admired on camera. There was even a sign on his dressing room door that reflected his reputation as an honest, people-first kind of man, showing that the hero image was not just an act, but part of who he truly was. That nickname fit George Reeves perfectly. He treated everyone with respect, from studio executives to the workers behind the scenes. He was polite, approachable, and always willing to lend a hand. He showed particular care toward children who made up his most devoted audience and only ever saw him as Superman. George understood that being viewed as a hero by kids carried real responsibility, and he never took that lightly. To him, the role was never a joke or a costume to hide behind. During one promotional tour for the show in the southern United States, George was awarded the honorary title of Kentucky Colonel. While the gesture was meant in good humor, it meant a great deal to him. When he returned to the studio, the prop department updated the sign on his dressing room door. It now read, "Honest George," also known as Colonel Reeves. That small change carried deeper meaning. It reflected the appreciation people had for him and his desire to be recognized as more than just a man in a cape. The sign was not meant as a punchline. It was a nod to the real person behind the Superman image, someone who wanted his character and values to be seen beyond the screen. George worked hard to show that he had more to offer than a single role, not only as a performer, but as a person. Even as his career became more uncertain in later years, his kindness, humility, and easygoing nature left a lasting impression on those who worked alongside him. People remembered how fair he was, how patient he stayed, and how little ego he carried in an industry known for excess. To the public, George Reeves would always be Superman. To his close friends and colleagues, he was simply Honest George, a dependable friend and a steady presence. He did not just play a hero on television. He tried to live like one in everyday life. George understood that wearing the Superman costume came with expectations, especially because so many children admired him. He took that seriously. Even though he smoked in private, he made sure never to do it in front of kids or cameras. He knew the influence he had, and as real acting opportunities became harder to find, he remained careful not to betray the image that meant so much to his youngest fans. Over time, George Reeves even quit smoking altogether. Part of that decision came from how seriously he took his image with young fans. He knew children were always watching, and he wanted to live up to what Superman represented. George also kept his private life tightly controlled. He avoided scandals and stayed away from anything that could damage how kids viewed him. When he appeared in public, he was calm, friendly and patient, often taking extra time to greet children who admired him. His efforts did not stop with appearances. George put real energy into causes he believed mattered. One of the most important was raising awareness and funds for myasthenia gravis, a serious illness that weakens the muscles. In 1955, he became the national chairman of the Myasthenia Gravis Foundation. That role showed that his concern for others went beyond image and into action. At his core, George Reeves cared deeply about people, especially children. To them, he was not just someone on television. He felt like a real-life hero who stood for kindness, strength, and hope. That is why what happened next shook so many people. On the night of June 16, 1959, tragedy struck.
The headline shouted the unimaginable. Superman had killed himself. In death, it turned out, as in life, George Reeves was hopelessly typecast. But Reeves was reportedly set to work on a new movie in Spain and was also about to be married. Many people who knew George Reeves suspected something entirely different.
Sometime between 1:30 and 2 in the morning, George Reeves was found dead in his bedroom at his home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. He had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. He was only 45 years old. It soon became known that George was not alone in the house that night. His fiancée, Leonore Lemon, along with several friends, were downstairs at the time. Leonore stated that she was in the living room when the gunshot occurred. However, one of George's friends, Fred Crane, later shared a conflicting version, saying he had been told that Leonore was much closer to the bedroom when the shot was fired. After the gunshot, Leonore reportedly rushed downstairs and repeatedly insisted that she had been downstairs when it happened. That claim raised eyebrows and was questioned by many who later examined the case. Despite the confusion, authorities ultimately ruled George Reeves's death a suicide. That conclusion did not sit well with everyone. Several details immediately stood out. The gun recovered from the scene had no fingerprints. No gunpowder residue was found on George's hands. At the time, investigative methods were limited, and the scene was not handled with the level of care people would expect today. Even more unsettling, the bullet that caused his death was found lodged in the ceiling, while 2 additional bullets were discovered on the bedroom floor. These unanswered details fueled doubt and speculation that would follow George Reeves' name for decades to come. All of the bullets recovered at the scene came from the same weapon found near George Reeves, yet no one inside the house reported hearing more than a single gunshot. There were no clear signs of a break-in, no visible struggle, and no obvious evidence of forced entry. Based on official statements, autopsy findings, and witness accounts, police concluded the case was a suicide. Even so, that ruling failed to convince many people. Fans and several of George's friends remained deeply uneasy about the conclusion. Leonore Lemon later stated that George had been severely depressed and had lost hope in his career. According to her, his repeated efforts to move beyond Superman had gone nowhere, leaving him discouraged and frustrated. One police report included a statement attributed to her in which she allegedly said he was probably going to shoot himself. Shortly afterward, a gunshot was reportedly heard, followed by her insisting that she had predicted it. Those details immediately raised doubts for many observers. George Reeves was buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Altadena, California. Despite the tragic and unresolved nature of his death, his legacy continued to grow. He was honored after his passing, even as questions surrounding his final moments refused to disappear. In 1960, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his contributions to television. Later, DC Comics recognized him as one of the 50 individuals who helped shape the company's legacy. Still, the shadow of doubt never fully lifted. From the moment George was found dead, some people refused to believe suicide was the full truth. The first and most determined voice of opposition came from his mother, Helen Basolo. She was convinced that her son would never have taken his own life and believed the investigation had been handled carelessly. Driven by that belief, Helen took action. She hired a well-known attorney, Jerry Giesler, to examine the case more closely. Under Giesler's direction, a second autopsy was performed on George Reeves's body. That step only intensified public interest and ensured that the mystery surrounding his death would continue to be debated long after Hollywood moved on. The second autopsy mostly matched the first set of findings, but it introduced details that raised new concerns. Medical examiners noted multiple bruises on George Reeves's head and body that were never clearly explained. Those marks added another layer of uncertainty to an already confusing case. After roughly a month of investigation, authorities still found no concrete proof of a crime. As time passed, attorney Jerry Giesler stepped away from the case. He ultimately accepted the conclusion that George had fired the gun himself and withdrew his challenge to the official ruling. Even so, the doubts did not fade. Rumors continued to circulate quietly throughout Hollywood, and not everyone accepted the suicide explanation. Several industry insiders openly questioned it. Actor Rory Calhoun, who was a close friend of George, told a reporter that no one in Hollywood believed the suicide story. Other well-known actors, including Alan Ladd and Gig Young, were also said to have rejected the official version. Among many in the industry, the story never fully added up. Another name that kept surfacing was Eddie Mannix, a powerful MGM executive. George had previously been involved in a long-running relationship with Eddie's wife, Toni Mannix. Some believed that this connection introduced a darker possibility. The idea that personal betrayal could lead to retaliation became part of the wider speculation. Those rumors were later explored in the book Hollywood Kryptonite by Sam Kashner and Nancy Schoenberger. The authors claimed that whispers around town suggested Eddie Mannix had ties to organized crime, and that George may have been silenced either to protect secrets or as an act of revenge. None of this was ever proven, but the stories continued to circulate. Tensions appeared to grow even stronger after George ended his relationship with Toni Mannix and chose to marry Leonore Lemmon instead. According to People magazine's June 20, 1995 edition, that sudden shift may have intensified emotions behind the scenes. Whether coincidence or cause, the timing only fueled more suspicion and ensured that George Reeves' death remained one of Hollywood's most debated mysteries. Even today, the death of George Reeves continues to circulate through Hollywood conversations, with people still searching for answers. Some believe he was quietly struggling, carrying emotional pain that few ever noticed. Others are convinced that the surface story of fame, heartbreak, and disappointment hid something far more serious behind closed doors. One of the most haunting questions remains why so few people attended his funeral. When George Reeves died, many expected a grand Hollywood farewell. He had been Superman to millions, a symbol of hope and strength. Instead, his funeral passed almost unnoticed. The service was held on July 1, 1959, at the Wayside Chapel of the Gates Funeral Home in Los Angeles, and it was remarkably low-key. Only a small group of close friends showed up. Among those present were Noel Neill, Don DeFore, and Gig Young. No major Hollywood power players attended, and the media barely covered the event. For someone who had once been one of television's most recognizable faces, the silence was striking. It raised an uncomfortable question about why Hollywood seemed to turn away from its own hero. Many insiders later suggested that fear played a major role. George Reeves' death was surrounded by rumors, whispers of scandal, and talk of possible murder. His past relationship with Toni Mannix, the wife of powerful MGM executive Eddie Mannix, only added to the tension. Eddie Mannix was widely believed to have deep influence within the industry, along with rumored connections that made people uneasy. As doubts about the suicide ruling spread, so did caution. Some in the industry worried that being publicly associated with George Reeves could draw unwanted attention or consequences. According to several accounts, attendance at the funeral was not just low by chance, but quietly discouraged. Years later, a few insiders admitted that the message had been clear. Staying away was safer. What should have been a star-filled tribute became a hushed, almost invisible ceremony. In the end, the silence surrounding George Reeves' funeral spoke volumes. Hollywood did not simply mourn him. It stepped back, choosing distance over loyalty, as if afraid that honoring him too openly might invite the very scrutiny everyone was trying to avoid. George Reeves's funeral became a quiet symbol of how quickly fame and loyalty can disappear once a story turns uncomfortable. It was not only sorrow that kept people away. Fear, embarrassment, and a desire to stay uninvolved played a role as well. In many ways, Hollywood seemed to erase its own Superman rather than face the questions surrounding his death. Decades later, those unanswered questions resurfaced on screen. In 2006, the film Hollywoodland brought renewed attention to the mystery surrounding George Reeves. Ben Affleck portrayed Reeves, while Diane Lane took on the role of Tony Mannix. Adrian Brody played a fictional private investigator named Louis Simo, a character inspired by, but not identical to, the real detective involved in the case. The real investigator, Milo Spiriglio, had been hired by George's mother to look deeper into her son's death. The film blended documented facts with dramatic interpretation, presenting a story that leaned on reality while allowing room for speculation. Rather than pushing a single explanation, Hollywoodland explored multiple possibilities and highlighted how tangled and unresolved the case truly was. One theory suggested that George may have been accidentally shot by his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, during a heated argument fueled by alcohol. Another possibility pointed toward Eddie Mannix, Tony Mannix's husband and a powerful figure in Hollywood, who some believed may have ordered George's death out of anger or revenge connected to the affair. A third angle presented in the film shifted suspicion toward Tony Mannix herself, portraying her as emotionally unstable and driven by jealousy after losing George. Each scenario was laid out without declaring any one version as the truth. Instead, the film emphasized the uncertainty that has surrounded George Reeves's death from the very beginning. By revisiting these theories, Hollywoodland reflected what many still feel today. The case remains unresolved, shaped by rumor, power, and silence, leaving George Reeves's story suspended somewhere between history and myth. One theory suggested that someone entered the house through a private entrance that had been known from earlier visits. Still, the most widely accepted explanation remained the simplest one, that George Reeves, weighed down by depression and convinced he had failed both personally and professionally, chose to end his own life. The film leans toward suicide as the most likely outcome, but presents it in a somber and reflective way, rather than as a clear conclusion. Adrian Brody's character begins the story obsessed with success, reputation, and recognition. As the investigation unfolds, he becomes emotionally worn down by what he uncovers. The case forces him to confront the cost of chasing fame at all costs. By the end, he turns away from headlines and ambition, choosing instead to focus on his family and the life he had been neglecting. Decades later, George Reeves appeared once again in popular culture. In the 2023 DC film The Flash, a computer-generated version of Reeves as Superman briefly appeared on screen. While intended as a tribute, the moment sparked controversy. Some fans felt uncomfortable with the use of CGI, especially considering the tragic and unresolved nature of Reeves's real-life story. George Reeves lived a life filled with sharp turns. Some moments were full of promise, others marked by disappointment. He began his career chasing big dreams, and at times it truly seemed like he had achieved them. He had charisma, strong screen presence, and natural talent. Audiences smiled when he appeared on screen, and children admired him without question. Away from the spotlight, George was often searching for something deeper. He wanted respect, creative freedom, and a sense of purpose beyond one role. He was not just the man in the cape. He played guitar, sang, toured the country, and worked hard to show that he had range and depth. He treated people with kindness and never acted superior, no matter who he was dealing with. Despite all of that, he often felt confined by an industry that celebrated Superman but struggled to understand the man behind the image. George Reeves's story is not only about his death, it is about a life spent navigating fame, expectation, and limitation. The applause, the smiles, and the iconic costume were real, but they were only one part of who he truly was. The other side of George Reeves's life was quiet, complex, and often isolating. That side is what continues to draw people in today. He is remembered not only because of how his life ended, but because many see something deeply human in him. A man who wanted to matter, who carried more weight than he ever admitted, and who meant far more to fans than he likely understood at the time. There is something powerful in the idea that someone who once felt overlooked is still remembered, still discussed, and still valued decades later. George Reeves remains part of the conversation because his story feels real. It reflects ambition, struggle, pride, and disappointment all wrapped into one life. His journey was filled with sharp highs and heavy lows, moments of recognition followed by frustration and limitation. Yet his legacy goes beyond a television role. As Superman and as a man, George Reeves continues to resonate with people who recognize the cost of fame and the quiet strength it takes to keep going. Not every hero is defined by how loudly they are celebrated, but by how deeply they are remembered. In many ways, George Reeves represents a kind of Hollywood story that rarely gets told honestly. The story of someone who reached massive visibility but still felt unseen. He had millions of fans, yet very few places where he felt fully understood. That contrast is what makes his life resonate long after his time. People look back now and recognize how much pressure he carried. The expectations, the limitations, the silence when he needed support. He gave audiences comfort and inspiration, but rarely received the same in return. His struggle reminds people that fame does not protect anyone from doubt or isolation. George Reeves became a symbol not just of heroism, but of vulnerability. His story invites reflection on how the industry treats those it elevates and how quickly admiration can fade when complications appear. That lesson continues to feel relevant even today. For many fans, George Reeves was their first Superman. He set the tone for what the character meant long before special effects and blockbuster budgets took over. His performance was grounded, sincere, and accessible, which made it believable. That sincerity is why his version of Superman still feels important. Beyond the costume, George represented decency in an industry not always known for it. He showed respect, humility, and care at a time when ego often ruled. Those traits left a lasting impression on the people who worked with him and the audiences who watched him grow. Even as newer actors stepped into the role, George Reeves remained a reference point. Not because he was flawless, but because he brought something honest to the screen. That honesty is what keeps his name alive. The mystery surrounding George Reeves may never be fully resolved. Facts were lost, memories faded, and decisions were made in a different era with different standards. What remains clear is that his life deserves to be remembered with care rather than speculation alone. His story is a reminder that behind every public figure is a private person navigating pressure, hope, and disappointment. George Reeves tried to live up to the image placed on him while still searching for his own identity beyond it. That struggle feels familiar to many people, even outside Hollywood. In the end, George Reeves is remembered not only as Superman, but as someone who tried to do right by others, even when life became difficult. His legacy lives in the quiet respect people still hold for him, not as a perfect hero, but as a real one. George Reeves's story does not end with a headline or a verdict. It ends in reflection. A man who gave people hope on screen, but carried quiet weight off camera. He stood for strength, fairness, and kindness at a time when the world wanted simple heroes. What he got in return was complicated fame and a legacy shaped by silence. That is why his story still matters, not because of rumors or theories, but because it shows what happens when someone is loved by millions and still feels boxed in. George Reeves was more than Superman. He was a working actor, a decent man, and someone trying to be seen for who he really was. Maybe the truth of his final moments will never be fully known. What is known is the impact he left behind. The smiles, the inspiration, the sense that doing the right thing still counted. That part never faded. If stories like this matter to you, the forgotten corners of Hollywood, the real lives behind the legends, then this is exactly what Retro Cinephile is about. Stick around, explore deeper, and keep these stories alive. Because some legacies deserve more than silence. If you want the truth Hollywood never wanted out there, the drama, the secrets, the cracks in the spotlight, you're in the right place. Smash like, hit subscribe, drop your thoughts below, and share this with someone who loves classic cinema. Retro Cinephile, where the past talks loud.